So I don't know if you guys are feeling the same way, but I'm definitely not as engaged or drawn to this topic of bottled water versus tap water as I was to when previously we were talking about wages. But getting into these prompts on how this SFA lesson was an inspiration to these workshop facilitators. In this as toxic as lesson, you can see how the steps of instruction were just to launch the activity, have students work in pairs, and then end with a debrief. And in pairs, in the heart of this lesson, students were actually doing their own water samples and tests. They were running their own experiment as they were asked to kind of complete these different worksheets. So obviously in this workshop, there are some differences, even though there were some similarities. So in the workshops launch, I thought it was awesome getting these participants who ranged in age from 10 to 60 all engaged by just sampling different waters and anonymous pitchers, just seeing if they could even tell the difference between tap water and bottled water, which they really couldn't. And then starting to educate these participants. So by watching the story of water, just having them understand how they are being charged 2,000 times more for buying bottled water than just getting tap water. And then really having them understand the message in that video clip. So starting to work with a 24 pack of bottled water to understand ratios like 1/2 and 1/3. And then kind of trying to wrap things up and bring closure by examining that municipal water report from Chicago, which I think was much too complex of a report for these learners to assess in a short amount of time, especially when there was a lot of confusion on the units. So definitely, obviously needing more time with that. But for myself, in terms of giving my students a primary source document to analyze, I've done this a lot. After multiple choice tests, I show my students our class report of data. So you can see on this multiple choice test, there were 25 questions. In green, all of the correct Scantron answers are presented. Each row represents a student and each column just shows how, the whole class answered that question. So students are asked to analyze these types of reports, and then as a class, we decide, well, which questions should we maybe relook at? Because in yellow, it's all the questions that students answered incorrectly, and in red, it's all the choices or questions that students left blank or just answered inappropriately, like choosing two choices from a Scantron when only one was appropriate. So by deciding again which questions we should look over, because maybe there's a class misconception or maybe it was just a poorly written question, I think it really gives students ownership over their learning.